He faced accusations of defying the court and was ridiculed in front of a live audience. But within moments, Tom Homan turned the tables and brought down the very man in the robe. Tom Homan arrived ready to make an impact. The marble floors of the federal courthouse in Salt Lake City resonated with the gravity of the impending events. Though cameras were prohibited, the hallway buzzed with reporters, their eyes wide and microphones poised, eager to capture every moment. The anticipation surrounding this hearing was palpable, with an air of tension that everyone could sense. No one anticipated it would escalate to such extremes. In courtroom 4B, Judge James Boasberg loomed above the proceedings, his demeanor inscrutable. His stance had been articulated clearly a week prior. Deportations under the Alien Enemies Act were paused, at least pending further judicial review, yet the administration proceeded regardless. Flights departing from Phoenix and Miami have been confirmed. A multitude of Venezuelans, with some seeking asylum, have now disappeared. Tom Homan, the former acting ICE director renowned for his unwavering stance, stood at the defense table in a navy suit that appeared to have endured the trials of battle. His tie hung a bit askew. His jaw tightened in a firm grip. He gazed directly into Boasberg's eyes. "Your Honor," Homan began, voice firm yet incisive, "the Department of Homeland Security operated within the bounds of a statute that has stood for more than 2 centuries. Your feelings about it don't change its legality." Judge Boasberg inclined his body slightly, engaging more closely. "Mr. Homan, a temporary restraining order has been issued by this court. You overlooked it." "No, sir," Homan responded. "A national security threat was addressed by our response. We utilized legal authority. We chose not to seek approval from a bench influenced more by political currents than by established principles." Gasping echoed through the gallery. A court officer adjusted his posture in his seat. Boasberg's brow quivered. "Just enough, but barely. Are you suggesting that this court is biased?" Boasberg inquired, his voice barely above a whisper. "The law should stand on its own," Homan stated, then took a moment to reflect. "Without the sway of organizations crafting narratives in secrecy." There it stood. The needle burrowed further in. The final line was not meant to be rhetorical. It held a deep significance, and Boasberg was acutely aware of it. Silence enveloped the room. Even the whisper of legal pads ceased. "Mr. Homan," Boasberg declared, his voice escalating, "you have arrived as a result of a legal summons. This court is not a place for lectures, and my integrity is beyond question." Homan remained unperturbed. "So, let's keep this professional, shall we, Judge?" The warmth in the room was unmistakable now. One could sense it. The stillness was anything but soothing. It was the sort that caused your skin to draw taut. Judge Boasberg leaned back, holding his gavel firmly, yet refrained from bringing it down. "Are you really going to justify actions that go against my explicit instructions?" "Very well," he replied with a chill in his voice. "But don't act as if you still possess any credibility. Your history of achievements is undeniable." That line transformed everything. Boasberg refrained from raising his voice. He refrained from slamming his gavel, yet he spoke clearly before the courtroom, addressing attorneys, journalists, and 3 members of Congress who sat quietly in the second row. In that instant, the focus shifted away from deportation, executive orders, or even the broader topic of immigration. It revolved around dignity, standing, influence. Homan remained in place, gaze fixed intently on Boasberg. He then reached into his briefcase with a sense of calm. "I had hoped today wouldn't come," he remarked. "But I refuse to be labeled corrupt by someone who ought to step back from this situation." He raised a sealed manila envelope. A red sticker adorned the flap, boldly declaring it as an internal confidential report. On the reverse side, the signature of an agent from the Office of the Inspector General is present. Whispers echoed throughout the courtroom. Boasberg's gaze sharpened. "What is that?" the judge inquired. "It's an official statement," Homan replied, "and it isn't from me. It originates from within your own circle." Before anyone had the chance to reply, the clerk rose and declared a short recess. Boasberg never sought it out. He gave a single nod, rose to his feet, and exited through the back door in silence. 15 minutes later, the courtroom reopened, transformed into an entirely different realm. The rigid structure of legal proceedings had vanished. What lingered was a tension, as sharp as glass, and every individual present in that room sensed that something had shattered. Boasberg was still absent. A deputy judge assumed his role temporarily, indicating that the issue was currently under examination. Yet, the focus on procedure had faded from everyone's mind. Each gaze, each murmur, every illuminated phone resting in laps, all focused on the envelope Homan had released like a detonating device. In the corridor, Tom Homan positioned himself beside his lawyer, Miranda Foley, who had previously served as a federal prosecutor and was known for her outspoken stance against judicial misconduct. She leaned in, her voice a soft murmur meant solely for his ears. Yet Homan remained almost statue-like, unresponsive. He continued to gaze at the doors as if anticipating something, or perhaps someone. In 2017, Miranda stated, her voice steady yet resolute, that Boasberg attempted to prevent ICE from accessing criminal databases associated with sanctuary cities. That held deep significance for Tom. It remained etched in his memory forever. Tom Homan dedicated more than 30 years to law enforcement, establishing his reputation by being present in places others avoided: raids, courtrooms, and congressional hearings. However, this situation struck a different chord, as he had been listening to murmurs for months regarding covert collaboration between immigration courts and advocacy organizations, with Boasberg's name frequently surfacing. Nothing overt, nothing verifiable, merely enough to leave you questioning who was truly orchestrating the events. In his grasp lay an affidavit, a declaration from a former court assistant known as Caleb Bristow. At 36 years of age, he was gentle in his demeanor, often lowering his gaze. Caleb had spent 5 years within Boasberg's chambers, but 2 months ago, he inexplicably disappeared from the court roster. He stated under oath that Judge Boasberg kept informal communication with a nonprofit named Human Horizon Legal. While not illegal on its own, the group had presented amicus briefs in the specific case, passionately advocating for the court to prevent deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. Caleb mentioned that he was requested to revise specific briefs, frequently prior to their official submission. That by itself was not typical procedure. It was far from suitable. However, the most challenging aspect? Several of those revisions occurred prior to the nonprofit submitting the documents to the court. That was not within the bounds of the law. That was clearly not a gray area. That was interference. Boasberg made his return 20 minutes later. His robe remained draped over him, yet his expression had transformed completely. Less chill, more shaken. Homan was back in his seat with Miranda sitting next to him. She fixed her gaze on the judge, unwavering and unblinking. "We have received the contents of your submission," Boasberg stated with a formal demeanor. "I firmly reject any suggestion of wrongdoing." Miranda responded with a calm demeanor. "No one has accused you yet. That is the issue at hand." Another gasp escapes. Homan leaned in a bit, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'm formally requesting a hearing regarding judicial misconduct," Miranda continued. "I am asking for your prompt recusal until that hearing occurs." Boasberg remained silent. He gazed at her intently. He fixed his gaze on Homan, then turned to the court clerk, who had turned noticeably pale. "The court will now take a recess until further notice," he announced suddenly, rising once more. However, on this occasion, 2 U.S. Marshals positioned themselves by the side exit, deliberately, not for mere spectacle. For the first time that morning, Boasberg paused. As soon as he left the bench, Homan's attorney promptly delivered a copy of the affidavit to the Marshals, and the doors shut behind them in silence. It is often said that within every courtroom, there exists a line, though it remains unseen. You may debate, question, or resist, but that boundary remains unbroken. On that morning, Judge James Boasberg made his way across it. What he expressed to Homan didn't fall within the realm of legal discussion. It was neither judicial restraint nor a mere display of controlled anger. It was an experience that resonated on a profound level, intimate, meticulously crafted, and intended to pierce through the surface. It occurred right before the initial break, in those fleeting moments just prior to the unveiling of the envelope. Amidst the turmoil, it slipped by unnoticed for many, yet the journalists in the front row were quick to seize the moment. The court transcription software did as well. And once the news broke, it traveled swiftly and uncontrollably. "You've always excelled at embodying the spirit of patriotism," Boasberg had remarked. "It's unfortunate that those in positions of authority never truly recognized your worth." That statement wasn't born out of a legal conflict. That was an individual attempting to publicly disgrace another individual in a federal courtroom, with cameras positioned outside and reporters eagerly anticipating the unfolding events. For Tom Homan, it was more than just offensive. It posed a danger to all that he believed in. He had endured Senate hearings, riots, and public backlash. He had faced insults broadcasted for all to see on live television. However, the insult from a federal judge marked the first moment he sensed that the system was no longer feigning fairness. It was sheer, unadulterated strength, revealed and unapologetic. As the second session picked up that afternoon, Boasberg was absent from his usual spot behind the bench. A temporary magistrate, Judge Marion Ross, presided over the docket. She maintained a serene demeanor, exhibiting neutrality without revealing any hint of feeling. Yet the atmosphere had shifted. Miranda took the lead. She acted without seeking approval. "Before we proceed, Your Honor, I request that the court hears the complete reading of the affidavit to ensure the record is thorough." Judge Ross cast a quick look at the marshal positioned close to the witness box. "Continue." As the marshal recited Caleb Ristow's statement, the audience remained utterly still. The assertions were exact. Chronological entries, iterations of documents, titles of files, internal communications. Caleb had even included metadata indicating the times when Boasberg had examined early draft briefs, weeks prior to their submission. The courtroom was fully engaged. It was contemplating the magnitude of what had just been uncovered. Homan's expression remained serene, yet his fingers drummed a deliberate, measured beat on the table. As the final words faded away, a profound stillness enveloped the space once more. Then a figure at the rear rose, an elderly gentleman clad in a gray suit, brandishing a press badge. He had been instructed to remain silent, yet the moment compelled him to break his vow. If this holds true, the judge interfered with legal precedents prior to the commencement of the trial. Ross refrained from reprimanding him. She merely stated, "That's not for this room to determine." Yet the remark had already made its mark. Across the street, within the U.S. Attorney's Office, investigators were diligently retrieving case files from Boasberg's earlier rulings, each matter concerning Human Horizon Legal. Each brief he had permitted, held, or referenced in his judgments. Now, it transcended this singular case. Inside the courtroom, Ross finally confronted the unspoken issue at hand. She stated that, until further notice, Judge Boasberg will step down from presiding over this matter. The Department of Justice has been informed. The court is committed to fully cooperating with any investigation. Purely straightforward, no embellishments, just the decisive impact. Tom Homan remained expressionless. He remained still, offering no acknowledgement. He cast his gaze downward at the table for a brief moment, then shut the folder that lay before him. "Do you believe this pertains to immigration?" he murmured to Miranda, his voice just above a whisper. "Concerns decay. Profound, profound decay." Yet, as the gallery started to empty, an individual discreetly exited through a side door, a burner phone already grasped in their hand. In just a matter of minutes, every detail spread across social media, exactly as it was. As the affidavit made its way to Capitol Hill, Caleb Ristow's name surged in online discussions, despite the fact that no one had ever laid eyes on him. On a serene street in Fort Collins, Colorado, Caleb found himself solitary in a rented apartment, perched above an abandoned dry cleaner. The curtains were closed, and his phone lay silent. It had been 2 weeks since he last communicated with his family, the silence stretching back to the moment he dispatched the documents to the office of the Inspector General, urgency marked boldly in the subject line. He could never have imagined it would reach this point. Caleb did not see himself as a champion. He had no desire for recognition or a publishing contract. He simply couldn't continue producing briefs from a nonprofit that consistently appeared on Boasberg's private calendar, especially after being clearly instructed not to raise any questions about it. It began modestly with calendar entries marked as community outreach. Yet Caleb was aware of the names. One of them was owned by Lenora Fetch, the chief legal strategist at Human Horizon Legal. Another was associated with Bernard Weil, a seasoned benefactor and political strategist recognized for challenging limits in pursuit of immigration reform. Both were connected to cases that Boasberg had presided over. However, the pivotal moment arrived during a lunch meeting that Caleb had not been meant to hear. Boasberg welcomed Weil into his chambers. Caleb had just stepped out to retrieve a document when he caught wind of it. Obvious and unmistakable. "Provide me with language that can withstand examination, and I will give it significance," Boasberg stated. "Simply maintain silence." Caleb stood still. He grasped only parts of it, yet he was aware that such collaboration was prohibited. Not among judges and external entities providing briefs. Not when decisions impacted the lives of real individuals. He remained silent for weeks, yet it gnawed at him. He meticulously documented every detail. Dates, times, and notes from meetings. He gathered screenshots from internal servers that displayed the modifications and monitored the IP addresses of individuals who accessed the files. The majority originated from within Boasberg's office. Several originated from Weil's private practice. He departed silently, without a word, sending a physical copy to the DOJ before vanishing into thin air. As he observed the news feed scrolling before him, Caleb found himself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, unsure whether to embrace relief or succumb to fear. Returning to Salt Lake, the affidavit was already creating waves. Oversight advocates were demanding a thorough review of each decision made by Boasberg over the last 10 years. A subcommittee in Congress has called for an urgent hearing to examine the ethics standards upheld in federal courts. In the meantime, Tom Homan found himself in a separate meeting with two federal agents from the Inspector General's office. They were not present for a publicity opportunity. They sought names, timelines, and intricate details that only an insider could divulge. One of the agents stated matter-of-factly that they'll attempt to suppress this. The legal system safeguards its members. This time, Homan responded with a firm refusal. Not when they believed they were beyond accountability. The gravity of the situation hadn't completely sunk in yet. It transcended mere political scandal. It represented a violation of confidence in the very setting where individuals were meant to discover equity. That evening, Judge Marion Ross issued a formal court order. Boasberg will stay suspended while a review is conducted. Every one of his ongoing cases was handed over to someone else. The verified affidavit has been sealed by federal investigators amid an expanding investigation. The media had only just started to gather around. Every network anchor, every podcast host, every political blog, from both sides of the spectrum, offered their perspective. Yet, amidst the clamor, a singular, silent truth had taken root in the thoughts of countless viewers. Something genuine had just been unveiled. It all began with an unassuming court clerk, a figure shrouded in anonymity, burdened by a secret he never wished to bear. However, just as the DOJ was gearing up for formal inquiries, another whistleblower stepped forward. A person asserted that Boasberg's actions extended beyond what anyone had comprehended. The clock had just ticked past 6 p.m. As the courtroom cleared at the end of the day, the air outside had turned crisp, yet within the confines of the federal building, the atmosphere was intensifying. Judge Boasberg's chambers had become a designated restricted area. 2 U.S. Marshals stood guard outside his office door. Access was strictly controlled. No one could enter or exit without proper authorization. The judge was not taken into custody. Not at this moment. Yet that did not imply he was liberated. In a nearby conference room, Boasberg found himself seated opposite 2 deputy marshals and a DOJ ethics investigator, Elise Graydon. She had no intention of being courteous. Her inquiries pierced with precision. Have you ever gotten early versions of amicus briefs from Human Horizon Legal prior to their public filing? Boasberg took a moment before responding. His fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. 2 times. He finally admitted that he couldn't remember the sequence. That doesn't provide a solution. And in an answer, Graydon responded, it's a simple matter of whether you did or did not. Boasberg cast his gaze downward. He swallowed, and his throat shifted subtly. Those were preliminary versions. Nothing is set in stone. It wasn't that way at all. What do you mean? She pressed. They were not swaying decisions. They represented the backdrop. Graydon reclined in her chair. You revised the claims put forth by a collective that stands to gain from your decisions. That doesn't provide the necessary context, Your Honor. That's a conspiracy. In the hallway, Tom Homan walked back and forth alongside Miranda. They exchanged few words. No words remained to be spoken. The system they believed they comprehended had suddenly revealed its true complexity. A federal agent strolled past, offering Homan a brief, firm nod. This one held significance. They were in motion. At 7:20 p.m., authorities had gained access to Boasberg's office following a sealed search order. Authorities seized 3 hard drives, a collection of personal notebooks, and an unregistered external USB that was absent from any government inventory records. The drive would later serve as the focal point of a distinct investigation, one that carried even more sinister implications. At this moment, the emphasis was on what was already in their possession. Caleb's affidavit, the metadata logs, meeting records, and now a second whistleblower from Human Horizon Legal, who has discreetly provided 6 months of internal emails revealing coordinated messaging strategies shared directly with Boasberg's law clerk. In the meantime, the courthouse buzzed with the presence of media vans, boom microphones, and the incessant flicker of flash bulbs. Demonstrators began to appear as well. Not your typical advocates. These were individuals fueled by frustration over corruption, feelings of betrayal, and the notion that justice had become something to seek out rather than something to anticipate. Within the confines of the federal holding office, Boasberg remained uncharged, yet his choices dwindled with each passing hour. In the central lobby, the Homelands lingered solitary by the expansive glass windows. Journalists attempted to call out inquiries over the barrier, yet he remained still. His gaze remained locked on the structure opposite, where a temporary review team from the DOJ had established its presence. Miranda approached him and presented a copy of the official notice that had just been issued to the press. Judge Boasberg has been placed on administrative leave while a federal investigation is underway, the statement indicated. The Department of Justice has confirmed its collaboration with the Office of the Inspector General and the United States Marshal Service. Accusations of wrongdoing considered valid. Homan grasped the paper, creased it neatly, and slipped it into the folds of his coat. Do you really believe this is justice? Miranda inquired. No, Homan replied, his gaze fixed elsewhere. This is merely the start. As the news traveled to Washington overnight, a subtle tension began to rise, for Boasberg was not the sole judge influenced by those nonprofit briefs. With the dawn of a new day, Washington, D.C. didn't awaken. It had already begun its journey. The corridors of the Capitol thrummed with urgent whispers, clandestine discussions, and the tension of private meetings behind sealed doors. A small group of legislators had spent the entire night awake, not due to any direct involvement in the case, but rather because they had long harbored suspicions that something of this nature could eventually come to light. The controversy involving Judge Boasberg had spilled beyond the confines of a single courtroom. A fissure had emerged in the federal system, one that demanded attention from all quarters. Within the chambers of the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Lowell Strown examined the affidavit, his expression conveying everything that needed to be said. This was more than just poor perception. This was a revelation, a perilous revelation. Strown informed his staff that there are at least 3 judges highlighted in this batch of filings. There are 2 in Arizona and 1 in Southern California, all mentioned in the same communication threads from Human Horizon Legal. The emails obtained by federal investigators overnight revealed consistent patterns, recommendations for legal language, exchanges of documents prior to filing deadlines, and pre-meeting calendar entries labeled with ambiguous phrases such as community alignment and policy sync. That by itself did not demonstrate any wrongdoing. However, with Caleb's testimony alongside the second whistleblower from within the nonprofit, individuals began to pose the pertinent questions. Who was aware? In the meantime, in Salt Lake City, Tom Homan found himself engaged in a confidential conversation with a Senate Oversight Council. The dialogue was deliberate, yet it carried a certain sharpness. This doesn't end with Boasberg, Homan stated. If they were sharing legal strategies like a chat among friends, you can bet it spread far beyond these walls. The Senate office assured that a hearing would take place, not only to discuss Boasberg's case but also to reconsider the overall handling of amicus briefs. For many years, external organizations have leveraged them to sway policy while presenting a facade of legal insight. Now, those unassuming little documents were being scrutinized closely. In D.C., the usual political factions aligned themselves as expected. Some came to Boasberg's defense, labeling the investigation as a right-wing smear campaign aimed at undermining immigration protections. Some embraced the idea fervently, asserting that it was high time the true nature of judicial activism was revealed, a maneuver disguised as benevolence. Yet in households throughout the nation, from Kansas City to Fresno to Dayton, everyday individuals weren't engaged in debates over legal concepts. They were inquiring about something more straightforward. Is the judge at the front of the room someone you can rely on? Networks aired repeated segments of Homan's clash with Boasberg, featuring slowed-down footage with captions. His quote, "Then don't make this personal, Judge," had already transformed into a meme, not due to its humor, but because it resonated with a sense of authenticity, sincerity, and relatability. For a long time, there was a lingering suspicion among Americans that the system lacked fairness, but now they possessed undeniable evidence. A figure of authority, draped in robes and shielded by federal protection, had already chosen a side before the gavel struck the wood. Within the confines of the Department of Justice, Elise Graydon was broadening the parameters of her inquiry. A task force was being quietly formed, without any press release. Another headline was unnecessary. Evidence was required. In Fort Collins, Caleb Risto observed the unfolding coverage from the seclusion of his apartment, remaining out of sight. Though his name was out in the open, his whereabouts remained a mystery. His scanned affidavit materialized on the screen, each line illuminated in succession. He silenced the television and extinguished the lamp. He remained still, enveloped in quietude. In a distant part of his thoughts, he wondered if he might have found some relief by now, yet all that lingered was a profound weariness. In the meantime, Miranda Foley was diligently strategizing her forthcoming action. Homan's name was suggested for testimony before Congress. She was advocating for it not for the sake of enhancing his reputation, but because the audience had a right to know what he witnessed behind those closed doors. The manner in which choices were presented prior to the hearings, the unspoken influence, the gestures masked as engagement. This was far from finished. The real challenge was only just starting. However, just as everyone was beginning to regain their composure, an internal memo from the DOJ surfaced, hinting that the next judge in the spotlight could be on the verge of stepping down. The memo arrived in inboxes shortly after 8 in the morning. It was a Thursday. It was never intended for the public to see, yet someone within the DOJ reached their breaking point. It was brief, merely 4 paragraphs, and it identified a second federal judge currently under discreet investigation. This particular instance originated in San Diego, showcasing a comparable pattern of engagements with Human Horizon legal and initial versions of advocacy briefs. And just like that, it ceased to be a Boasberg tale. The narrative unfolded in a systematic manner. The cable news outlets reported on it in less than an hour. Headlines transitioned from controversy to doubt. Political analysts began calling it Briefgate, yet the general public grasped the situation without the need for a label. This wasn't about political affiliations. It revolved around individuals who were meant to remain neutral, yet quietly took sides. In Salt Lake City, Tom Homan stood outside the courthouse alongside Miranda, addressing an expanding crowd of reporters. His expression lacked anger. It was weary yet determined. "I don't care what side of the immigration debates you're on," he stated, his voice unwavering. However, when judges begin to seek counsel from nonprofits prior to the commencement of the hearing, it undermines the essence of justice. That is a beautifully crafted sequence. He took a moment, then pressed on. "We engaged in battles for the principle that when you enter a courtroom, you deserve a fair opportunity, regardless of your identity. What transpired in this place? That goes beyond a mere legal misstep. That feels like a deep betrayal." The audience was captivated. A few inclined their heads in agreement. Some remained motionless, absorbing the words that surrounded them. Homan sought no glory from this. He never did. He longed to step into courtrooms where the battle was just, even if it proved to be a challenge. He held a steadfast belief in law and order, not merely when it benefited him, but when it existed independently, even in moments of inconvenience. As he moved forward, a chorus of reporters shouted inquiries. Will there be any charges brought forth? Is Boasberg facing jail time? What information did the DOJ possess and at what point in time? Homan remained silent. He glanced over at Miranda. Do you believe anything will be different after this? He inquired in a softer tone now. It hinges on whether individuals are truly engaged, she remarked. Later that evening, a discussion was broadcast on national television. Judges, legal scholars, and former clerks engaged in a lively discussion about the implications of the recent events. Many concurred it served as a crucial reminder. Some claimed it was merely the start. Yet throughout the nation, in living rooms, break rooms, and at kitchen tables, people were engaging in a different sort of dialogue, one that didn't require any legal expertise. They engaged in a discussion about trust. If the courtroom cannot be trusted, what remains? In Fort Collins, Caleb at last powered his phone back on. Numerous unread messages awaited, including a few from journalists, a note from a long-lost cousin, and a couple from an unknown number that had been blocked. He remained silent to all of them. Instead, he settled into his chair and brought up a fresh document on his laptop. He was uncertain about what he would compose, perhaps a letter, perhaps a record. Yet a voice within him insisted that the truth had further revelations to offer. The Judiciary Committee in D.C. has decided to initiate a formal inquiry into the practices surrounding amicus briefs in federal courts. Silently, additional whistleblowers started to emerge. Not everyone possessed undeniable evidence, yet their narratives aligned with the established pattern. The fissures were genuine. The tale began with a clash, a charged exchange between two men in tailored suits positioned before the judge's bench. Yet it concluded with a query that each American needed to ponder individually. What occurs when those who vow to uphold justice abandon the established guidelines? Justice transcends the symbols of authority. It is not confined to a robe, a bench, or a gavel. Each day brings a decision, a unique situation, a distinct perspective. When we cease to anticipate integrity from those in positions of authority, we grant that authority the freedom to prioritize its own interests. If you've journeyed to this point, take a moment to reflect on the true essence of fairness. If you value accountability, regardless of who is in the limelight, then join us, as this is only the beginning.